Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Special Committee of the Whole for Friday, November 10th, 2023. I'd like to call this meeting to order at 9:33 and acknowledge that the SCRD is located in the territories of the Seashelt and Squamish Nations. We have an amended agenda in front of us today. Directors, the page numbers in the amended agenda and the regular agenda don't correspond, so I'm going to, as we go through, I'll call out exactly what page number and annex we're on. So it'll be a little bit of back and forth in the documents, but we'll get there in the end. Anything else to change on the agenda before I ask for a motion to adopt? If not, can I have a motion to adopt as amended? Moved and seconded. All those in favor? That's carried. Thank you. And we do have Director Stanford online today. Director Stanford, if I miss you, feel free to just jump right in, because sometimes the hybrid format doesn't work for everybody. So, okay, first up, can I have a motion to receive all reports? Moved and seconded. All those in favor? Thank you. And with that, we're going to move right into Annex A in the original agenda, Sunshine Coast Regional District Water Services Capital Plan Update. And I think we're turning this over to Manager Doyle, or... Yes, Manager Doyle.
Hello.
Who is with
Thank
us
you,
online.
Chair. The report in front of you today aims to provide a high-level update on the capital plan in progress for the SCRD water services. The SCRD has made considerable strides to improve our understanding.
Manager Doyle, are you able to pull your microphone just a little bit closer?
Is that better?
A little bit, yeah. Thank you.
It's my first time on Zoom in a while here. The report in front of you today aims to provide a high-level update on the capital planning progress for the SCRD water services. We've made considerable strides to improve our understanding of the asset renewal needs for each of these water services. And while there's still work to do, at this point, the general message has clarified, and this information can help to communicate the work that needs to be done to ensure that these services are able to be provided sustainably into the future. Recognizing that the current conversation around these services has largely been dominated by high-profile challenges posed by climate change and a growing population, this report seeks to ensure that the full context is considered as solutions are pondered, and that any decisions that are made which may impact the financial sustainability of these services are fully informed. Staff are available to answer any questions. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. Directors, any questions for the manager? I don't see any hands up. Oh, there we go. Director McMahon.
Thank you. That was a very interesting report. I enjoyed it in the sense that it was a very interesting report, maybe not in the sense of the aging infrastructure part. Good graphs. So we estimate the service life of various components, but the estimate may not meet the reality in one direction or another direction. So how are we going to go forward with taking a real life snapshot of what the conditions are? Is there going to be like a major inspection part of this whole asset renewal plan?
Go ahead.
Thank you for the question through the chair. This report, is just seeks to inform. Its purpose is to kind of motivate some decisions in the future. I think that, to your point, though, that's exactly what's needed if we want to have an absolute understanding of the condition of our assets. At the same time, there's a reason why when you look across the province and across the country, the estimated useful life of each asset class is, doesn't vary that much. So an average estimated useful life is typically representative, but an asset condition program would inform this in a higher level of detail, certainly.
Thank you. Director Lee?
Wasn't quite ready. I just don't actually have a question. I just have a comment. I wanted to say how much I appreciate having this level of detail, and it's a lot of new information, and it really helps me understand it. So thank you very much for your hard work.
Great. Thank you very much. And I don't see any other hands up. This was just received for information, a lot of information, important information. So we're going to move on to Annex B from the amended package, which is starting on page 28 of the amended package. Well, the page number is 28. And with that, I think we're turning this one over to CFO Perot, which is Regional Water Service Area 2024 Rate Bylaw Amendment.
Thank you, Chair. So this particular report is in anticipation of the 2024 rate setting, and the purpose is in order to set the rates. And we understand that in this particular report, we're providing some basis of why the rates are being proposed for the overall percentage. And some of the projects that are listed in here are also going to be presented as part of the 2024 budget deliberations in December. Typically, the process is when you see these rate reports, you would have had a pre-budget session, so you would have, and the public would have seen a preliminary review of what the proposed projects are going to be. So why I mention that is the rates today are based on an overall projection. They aren't prescribed. So what that means is if one of these projects do, or if there's additional projects that are going to be approved, it's not to say that we would adjust the rates accordingly. We have in the prior report just understood that we have significant lack of funding and sustainable funding in our services, both for operational and capitals. So if we don't approve a project, for instance, it just means that it will be going back into or will contribute towards the reserve. So that's the basis of the report. Essentially, we are making some very conservative estimates as to recommendations for the operating and capital reserve. Over the last few years, there have been significant increases, and of course, just last month, we presented a report on the water strategy, water rate strategy, as we move towards volumetric billing. So those are also some considerations in this particular report as to the things that are coming up, which is also outlined in the report. So there's more to come. What we're working towards here at the regional district, as the prior report outlines, is to try to give the public and the board some level of understanding as to what future rates will be. So setting rates consistently, because right now we're obviously in a reactionary state and doing a yearly adjustment to the rate versus a strategy associated with the rates. So that strategy will be informed as outlined in the document with the water strategy. So what that also includes is our capital renewal and asset management, our preventative maintenance plans, but also our new sourcing items that we need to contemplate. So that's not considered in the prior report as to what type of investment we need to put into our water systems in order to have sustainable water delivery on the Sunshine Coast. So there's a lot of cost pressures. So we feel that this is a very conservative, although it's a double-digit increase, it's still quite conservative for, I think, what the service needs are for the Sunshine Coast. So we'll take any questions if there are any. Thank you.
Thank you. Just before I go to my speakers list, I did want to point out to directors that today is not the day to debate the projects that are listed on page 29. I've got a lot of questions about stuff that's in there too. But for today, we're just looking at the overall rate numbers. The projects will come during round 1 and round 2 budget. So with that, Director Inkster.
Yeah, thanks for the reminder, Chair, of what today is about and what the discussion should be about. Question through you to the CFO. As Ms. Perot mentioned, the information will come to us today and a number of times before the final budget. So I'm wondering when that final decision would be or would theoretically be made and done in terms of the calendar next year. And that's just my first question. My second question is, when we proceed with the changes in the rates over the last number of years, has the regional district been, as we tell the public, because they're not all at these meetings as we know, that what other areas are facing in British Columbia as a comparable so that as we've doubled rates a number of years ago, and as we continue to increase rates, it would be good to let people know what other areas are also dealing with, because we always get you guys are the highest rates and the highest taxes on the Sunshine Coast in British Columbia. And political people know that's not true. But if we have comparables, we can actually prove it. So those are just, one's a communication question. The first one is just about the calendar and information and decision-making. Thanks.
Just before I go to the CFO, I wanted to clarify your first question.
Yeah.
So you were talking about final decisions, what have you. I mean, the recommendations today are going to feed into bylaw readings for December 14th.
Yeah.
For the regular board meeting.
Yeah.
And so when we look at the projects in round 1 and round 2, anything that we do or don't move forward with is going to have an adjustment on how much goes into the reserves. The rates that we recommend today are going to be potentially the rates that we set at the December 14th meeting. So was there something further that you were?
So that is the final date of decision then, December 14th is what you're saying on rates.
For the rates, yeah.
Okay.
For 2024.
Okay, and the reason I was asking that is that there was to be budgetary discussions as well as going forward that would include dollar amounts and or rate changes. So if in
Gotcha.
fact, does it change once the December 14th decision is made, will it change in budgets?
I'll go to the CFO, but yeah.
So one of the requests of the board, part of the budget debrief for 2023, was that there are decisions made at budget and our rates are usually adopted ahead of time. So that's why we are recommending that the bylaws, so it allows for any significant variations for the December 14th reading. If there's nothing really material, we would just progress with the bylaws as approved. But at least it gives us that there's a duration there, but we also have some public sessions that have just been released. So we're going to be holding some in-person and virtual meetings, and there's a lot of media and all sorts of stuff on our websites, et cetera, for people to get informed about the rates. So, but round 1 is going to be December. The bylaw readings are going to be December, and that's because we have a statutory requirements based on the existing bylaws that everything has to be adopted before December 31st. Our final financial plan is scheduled to be approved in February.
Thank you. Director McMahon.
So just to get my head completely around this, the utility rates affect the budget, but the budget affects the utility rates. So we set the utility rates and we're basically setting an envelope to work in going forward. So our plan in the long term for utilities, I would guess, would be to have a 5-year plan for rates. Is that the horizon we'd be looking at?
That would be great. I think what we would do is we'd probably focus on a 3-year with annual adjustments, kind of the same model we do for our capital plans, but in a more holistic manner. I think all of the documents that the board is working on and staff is working on right now, so your long-term strategy, your asset management plans, we need to collate all of that information to see what the horizon's going to be with the overwrapping part of volumetric billing. So it's a lot of moving parts going on right now, but that's what we're striving for, is for us to be able to have a 3 to 5 year outlook and longer.
Thank you. Director Stanford.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'm just wondering, when we look at the different options, you've got 3 options and 2 you don't recommend. How do you come to those numbers? I understand the one you recommend, but there's not a rationale for how you came to, for instance, like a 5.41 increase, which you don't recommend, or a 16.91 increase, which you don't recommend, they're quite specific numbers, and I'm wondering what you're leaving in or taking out to come to that those numbers.
Good question. I don't know if CFO Pro has the answer to that, or if that's Manager Doyle, but I'll let CFO go first.
Yeah, and I appreciate that they are very specific numbers. And that's because in the bylaw, you actually, because we have several types of rates, we have to arrive at a dollar figure. And so that's why we use a percentage in order for us to generate, because we have several types of like metered type of billing, we have commercial billing, all those kinds of things. So the things that we're taking in or taking out is, I would reverse it to say, what are we trying to arrive at the end as far as how much reserves we have in the budget? And what we know is we're looking at historical reductions to the reserves, and we're saying what would be the most prudent recommendation. So that's what we've come forward with. So it's not necessarily we're taking out projects necessarily, it's what we're aiming at the end goal for both the capital and the operating reserve. Does that answer the question?
I don't think it did, but Director Stanford?
Yeah, so I certainly understand the recommended option. I'm just not sure how you arrive at the numbers for the non-recommended options. They're just very specific. If it was like a 10% increase or a 5% increase, I would understand that, but it's the specificity of the numbers. So I'm assuming something is coming or going.
I think
specific part of it.
Yeah, so I mean, there's like an accordion that we could do with this. And so we're essentially trying to target a rate, and what rate would be a reasonable estimate based on like the overall user rate and the parcel tax. So for, say, option number 3, we were targeting a rate that was a round number, $750 would be something that people could understand.
And a percentage.
Yeah, it's round
Okay.
numbers, but then that translates to a very obscure
Specific.
percentage.
Okay. Thank
Okay,
you.
thank you. That makes a lot of sense. Director Bax?
My question is, first a statement of thank you for the report, using the capital planning update and looking at these rate bylaws, looking at them together. Things start to make a lot more sense. And I was wondering if, in your opinion, you think that we are heading towards creating a sustainable water system here? Is this
Heading
are-
towards,
Are we
yes.
heading? Is that's the whole point, isn't it? Well, I know the answer is. I know what the answer is going to be, but being only a year in, and I've learned a lot about these systems in the last year, and I'm just wondering how you, if you can look back over pre-COVID days, what do you think the change has been in your approach to the sustainability of this system over the last 5 years?
Go ahead.
Well, anyone who's been sitting here or has been tracking water in any parts of the country knows that climate change is our biggest curveball. It's expedited beyond. And so essentially that's putting pressure on our water supply. And so that's the two components. It's essentially the growth side of the house, the supply. So we need to build more infrastructure, which means we have, more debt and all sorts of stuff we have to pay for. And then we have to maintain the very large and complex infrastructure that we have right now. Combined with, sustainable service delivery, recruitment and retention, those types of things, supply chain, there's multiple factors. I think we have a lot of challenges ahead of us, both financially and supply, that we're trying to ensure we have a better understanding of. But I think the changing landscape is keeping us on our toes.
Thank you for that. I don't see any other hands up yet, so I'm just going to take a moment here in that obviously, we're going to get to volumetric billing eventually, so hopefully the users that are more conservative are going to see reduced rates. But when we're seeing double-digit increases every year, year after year, I guess my question is, do we have an idea, in conjunction with that previous annex, of where we're trying to get to with something like the parcel tax? We're looking at $392 right now, $450 next year. Like, do staff have a goal in mind of $600 for the parcel tax or anything like that? Like, do we know where the ceiling is yet?
Well, in the prior report that you received in number 1, you now know that your estimated replacement cost is in the neighborhood of, let's just use round numbers, 500 to 750 million just for the regional system. So 5% of that would be very conservative, I think. I think 2% would be a little challenging. So I think that's what we have to work towards. We have skirted around the 5 million mark, and you see we've really dipped below that, where we've gone as far as like below $2 million in our reserves, and that really is not a very sustainable amount of money for us to be able to react to things in a timely manner for the type of infrastructure that we have. So we have to work towards that policy, both for operational reserves as well as capital reserves, and each service of the regional district will be different. This particular report and the work is one of the last pieces that we were looking for to be able to bring a draft policy for the board's consideration. So that's contemplated for 2024.
Great, thank you. All right, I don't see any other hands up. Directors, we do have recommendations on page 28, unless somebody wants to take a stab at a different option, but I would look for somebody to put their hand up. Director McMahon? You're making the recommendations as presented on page 28? Okay, do I have a seconder for that? I do have a seconder, thank you. And this is voting A, B, D, E, F, and District of Sechelt. And I don't see any other hands up, so I'll call the question. All those in favor? And that's carried. Thank you. Moving back to our original agenda package, Annex C, which is North Pender Water Service Area 2024 Rate Bylaw Amendment. You have page 35 in the original package, and back over to the CFO.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So for the North Pender water system, very similar to those for the regional system, we're estimating projects that are coming forward for the 2024 budget. There are several challenges that are coming forward for the North Pender system. So essentially, we are recommending, again, a very conservative rate based on the projected needs. One of the most significant matters for North Pender will be the need of a new water treatment plant. And so essentially, yeah, there's a lot to do there.
Thank you for that. Directors, any questions? Look to Director Lee, as it's his area.
Thank you, Chair. No, the report's quite well done, and I understand it quite well. I notice that the new item is in there of connecting north and south, or having a look at it, which I very much appreciate. I think it's quite complete. I am ready to make a motion to accept the recommendations, and I believe it's on page 35.
Okay, and I have a seconder for that. Thank you. Do I have any other discussion on the motion? If not, I will call the question. This is voting all directors. All those in favor? And that's carried. Thank you. Next up is Annex D, South Pender Water Service Area 2024 Rate Bylaw Amendment. This is page 44 in our amended agenda package. And I'll turn this over to the CFO.
Thank you, Chair. So for the South Pender water system, it has some different challenges than the north system does. There are several projects listed there as well that are being proposed, and some of those are cost shared with the North Pender system. So we just wanted to ensure people understood that, that essentially the allocation is based on what the needs are. We also, just to note some of the reason why the amended agenda was presented, and that's just as we refined some of the proposals here, we had to realign where certain projects would be funded. And that main one was the water supply analysis for South Pender Harbor. So there was a change from capital funding to operating funding. However, we did not make any change to the estimated rate, but it does impact the reserve outcome at the end. So take any questions if there are any. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And again, I'll look to Area A first, as it's your system.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, again, I find this very clear. It's unfortunate we have double-digit increases, but the climate change is forcing us into a corner where we have no choice. And so I'd like to make a motion to accept the recommendations as listed on page 43.
Thank you, and I have a seconder for that. Director McMahon, I see your hand up.
Yeah, this is a slightly peripheral question, but so we have 9 water systems and 3 water services. The sewer services are all separate, where only the users pay into it. But 7 of our water systems are all in the regional water service. And why is that? Like, why were they not set up as individual water services where it's a user pay, same as the sewer systems?
Decision of the electorate and the board of the day. Those are some of the considerations. So you'll be faced with some of that coming up for, say, Hopkins. One of the options will be create a local service area or have it just be part of the regional system. So that's why. Historical decisions.
Director Lee?
Yes, I would note that North and South Pender are independent services as well. And my first reaction is to make them into a single service. But you have a lot of challenges when you propose to do that because the costs have been varying as the thing evolves. So some people are paying more and some people are paying less. And if you make it a single service, you're asking one to donate to the other. It's a tough thing. And that's why I was asking simply for an emergency connection between North and South in case one or the other plant fails. But if as Donna says, if I was the king or the queen and I could unilaterally do it, I'd wave my magic wand, but that isn't the way we work, so.
Thank you. I do have a motion on the floor, and I don't see any other hands up. So I will call the question. This is voting all directors. All those in favor? And that's carried. Okay. Thank you. Next up, Annex E in our amended package, page 52, 2024 wastewater user fee and capital plan overview. And I believe we're turning this over to Manager Doyle. Oh, to CFO Perot for an introduction. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Manager Doyle is on hand to speak to some of the capital. We just wanted to provide a general overview because there are several wastewater services of the regional district. Of course, we have 15, as noted by Director McMahon, that are not having recommendations for either a user fee increase or a frontage fee increase. So we just wanted to ensure that public and users understood that. There is going to be, I just wanted to make note too, in addition to the water rates and water information, those information is going to be noted on our Let's Talk page, and there's going to be significant media and discussions about that. If there is any questions from wastewater services, they can always attend some of those meetings that we're going to be holding. They're not specific to wastewater, but of course, everyone's invited to have any questions if they have any. So essentially, we've just listed the services that are not getting recommended for rate increases. And we also, part of the amended agenda was that we had some omission to include Sunnyside, which had a multiple year increase in 2022. So they too are not having a rate increase that we need to amend a bylaw for. However, there is an increase to their rate that was previously approved. We also did just the same for the capital. So we did include some of the frontage fees because there's only 3 services that have a recommending change to the frontage fees for 2024. And that was just subsequent work out of last year where it wasn't felt we were ready to make multiple year decisions on that. So take any questions if there are any, but some of the more details are in the subsequent reports. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Directors, any general questions? Director Gabias.
Thank you, Chair. It's going to be maybe a long question, or more like I'm going to look to you to see if I got this right. I'm trying to wrap my head around all of this. So with your experience, hopefully you can help me out. So I'm trying to simplify it as much as possible in my mind to try and understand how budgets and expenses work. So if I were the owner, the lucky owner of a wastewater plant, and I didn't have a whole lot of money, and the person who, and the wastewater plant is in kind of a bad shape and needs some big repairs, but the person I would hire is not really available or can't commit to spending a whole lot of time on repairs on my plant. So what I would do is, like, every year, I would put some money aside, anticipating the costs based on probably last year's cost, like how much that contractor charged me, and like maybe like, oh, are the fees going up this year on his end, so like compensate for that. And then I'd give myself a cushion to say, like, to be sure I have enough, and then hopefully at the end of the year I have more than I needed, and so I can put that money aside so that when those big repairs come down the road, then I'll have some, it's not going to hit me like all at once. I'll have some money put aside already. That's
I think you've just summarized asset management
right.
right there.
Right.
So yes.
So to follow up, is there a ceiling to how much money I want to put aside for the future? Or is that, do I just keep, like, when do I stop? When I say, okay, I think that's enough right now, and I can just reduce my costs for the following year?
That's a good question that I'll go to the CFO for.
Yes, so we don't have a formal policy, like I said earlier, for either operating reserves or capital reserves, and that's what we're working towards. One of the interesting thing with our wastewater historically is we didn't have appropriate alignment with types of reserves, so distinguishing between operational reserves for operating related items and capital for capital relating items. We had some services that only had an operating reserve, and you had funding coming in and out of that service. So a couple of years ago, we made a change to our financial sustainability policy and realigned rates that had capital funding distinctly being used for capital and operating reserves distinctly used for operating. But what that means is we do have some services that are underfunded and we have some that are overfunded already. We know that just anecdotally. For instance, Lee Bay has a significant amount of operating reserves. And so what we're proposing for this year is actually to use use the operating reserve as a rate stabilization. So that's why it's not being recommended to use those. But we're going to have a decision by the board to essentially draw from the operating reserves to pay for some of that. So we don't want to overcharge people. But what we do is we look at each distinct service and see what would be appropriate for them. So for instance, a feasibility or an engineering feasibility study could be anywhere from $10,000 to $50,000, depending on what it is. To do a condition assessment, for instance, could be upwards to $100,000 for a large system. So we look at the service and the assets that are in there and see what kind of operational requirements we would need. Because what we're trying to do is create a steady climb for rates instead of peaks and valleys. So I think that's what we're working towards with some of the operating reserves. Many of the wastewater services just aren't there. For instance, Roberts Creek, we've actually had to, it's been a very positive relationship with them, and the actual users have paid for some of the operational out of their strata, for instance, to fund those instead of, doing a significant rate hike. So we're getting there. I think we're much more aligned, but we do need to look at what would be an appropriate operating reserve. That's why we're seeing significant climbs in the user rates, because we're trying to build that buffer for operating reserves for plants that don't have money.
GM Rosenboom.
Thank you. In addition to that, I think what is the big difference between wastewater plants and, for example, the water services is that the budgets are really small, and the uncertainty in actual cost can be quite big. Let's say if there's a big storm event and we have to do a pump out, it can easily be $5,000. So yes, we might. So what we're doing is we're budgeting for a number of pump outs a year, but one year you're overshooting it, you don't need it, and yet the next year you might need double that amount. So the operational reserves are also used to buffer for those kind of expenditures. And some of our systems are just more vulnerable for those kind of expenditures than others.
Thank you. Director McMahon.
Right. I was going to try and use an average example, but I'm not sure there is such a thing as an average example when it comes to these sewer systems, because they're all so different and some of them are so quirky. But say for Sunnyside, we set the rates for 3 years a couple of years ago. What's going to happen next? Are we hoping to have condition assessments on all these systems so that we can then try another 3-year rate setting exercise, or is it going to be different for each one? Like, how are we going to deal with this?
So that's the different buckets. So when we talk condition assessments or feasibilities, they're just a little bit nuanced. So condition assessments, we don't typically do unless there is a need for concern, if we're unsure of the condition. So for instance, Wood Creek, if there was perforation in the pipes, we did some condition assessments. Some years ago, we actually did some condition assessments for many of the wastewater systems. So we've already had some of that information. So some of that would be operational, and then sometimes it would be capital. So what we're trying to understand is what the needs are of it. So we don't necessarily say, oh, we need to do a condition assessment, so but we do try to project what the needs, overall needs of the service are going to be. And we're also trying to, again, manage those peaks and valleys, so we're not coming back and have to say, well, we stabilized the rates for those 3 years, and now we have to come to a large increase because we didn't fund enough. So we're really hoping that's not going to be, because we're transitioning to this 3-year model. So again, we're quite new at this, so there may be some adjustments along the way, depending on the service needs.
Thank you. Director Lee?
Actually, I think my question was just asked. I note, like on page, probably the reason that we have an amended agenda is on page 54, we have a 2024 column for the capital. And we didn't really talk about the capital, but that's because we talked about it in 2023 and we set a 5-year plan. So I believe that's right. And the second part of my question is, I'm quite sure that we looked at this to make sure we were trending in the right way. And if there was some problem with it, that particular plant would be getting a more detailed report, even at this meeting, if that had happened. So I just wanted to confirm that that was correct.
Who would like to take that?
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, we did review all the services listed here and confirmed that the rates as last year approved for 2024 are still supported by staff. So that's why they're listed here. And one other reason for sometimes not recommending a 3 or 5 year rate structure is that, for example, there are plans where we know that there are huge changes in services upcoming. For example, Sakana, where there's a lot of build-out happening. It doesn't make sense to set now a rate for 5 years or 3 years because we know that there will be a lot of changes that might impact the cost overall. So there, in terms of buckets, that's one of there's a bucket where we say there's a lot of happening, so let's do it for 1 year, and then once there's a more stable external environment, then set it for a longer period of time. Thank you.
And just to add on to that real quick, that chart on page 54, the 3 that are listed as TBD are the 3 capital plans that are in our agenda for today. So Director Lee, did you have a follow-up or?
No, just a comment. Originally, I was skeptical, and now I'm beginning to like it. So thank you.
Thank you. I don't see any other hands up. This report was just for information. So I think with that, we're going to move on to Annex F, which is page 54 of our original agenda package, which is the Greaves Road wastewater 2024 user fee review. And my understanding is that we're not going to get introductions for every single one. But if staff wanted to say anything in particular, they can wave at me. So directors, are there any questions about the Greaves Road wastewater user fee review? I'll look to Director Lee.
Just a clarifying question. I'm not, it shows a new staffing request, but I don't believe that it's an allocation because of a new staffing request. I do believe it's because we're finally going to have enough staff to actually do what we should be doing. Is that, or at least hopefully, if we later on do something. Could staff comment on that for me?
So that's the second bullet on page 55,
Yes, that's correct.
CFO.
Yeah, so you're going to see that in multiple reports, and it'll become clearer what that means when you see the budget proposal for it. It's actually for a new type of engineering position that's going to cover all the wastewater facilities and some of the water facilities. So this is the estimated apportionment to Greaves Road.
Follow-up?
And in reality, it will be it'll be allocated as to the actual work that's done at the end of the year, correct? Yes, thank you.
Perfect. Thank you. I don't see any other hands up. Director Lee, this is your area. Would you like to make a recommendation?
Absolutely. Page 54, I'd like to make a motion to accept the recommendations on page 54.
And I have a seconder for that. Thank you. I don't see any other hands up. This is voting all directors, so I will call the question. All those in favor? And that's carried. Director Lee has to leave us here in a few minutes, so one thing I forgot to do was mention that we're going to move the Lily Lake wastewater user fee review up to be our next item. So that's item number 15, Annex N, page 81 to 83 in our original agenda package. And so, Director Lee, this is your area. I'll look to you first if you've got any questions.
Just it seems like disposal and trucking expenses have gone up a lot, up to 2,600. Is that gone up that much across the board for this kind of stuff, or is there something unique to Lily Lake I should know about?
I think it's mostly the District of Sechelles' fault, but I think Manager Walkie might have
Thank you,
something.
Chair. You answered half of the question for me. The District of Sechelles rates for disposal go up every year, and the rates for the pumping, which we've just tendered for a contractor, have gone up considerably for the actual truck to get there and pull the sludge out. Thank you.
Thank you. So it's business as usual, it just costs that much more. And my last question on Lily Lake, because it's kind of unique. We have a 14-unit senior housing coming on board. I guess it'll be, I'm assuming it's next year because I don't see it mentioned here before we start billing, and I don't believe they're in residence. But does our fee structure allow for 14 units in one piece of property on what amounts to a dedicated septic system? I know that's a tough question. I probably should have asked it earlier, but
I think staff need a moment to confer on that one. CFO?
Thank you, Chair. So we'll have to have a look at the bylaw related to that, and usually the timing associated when that information gets passed along to us is usually when the status of the building is complete. They come on to the roll, the BC assessment property tax roll, then we would catch up to that, and that would be highlighted as part of the parcel tax review process. So not knowing the status of that one specifically and how it will impact the bylaw will ensure to make sure we have a review for that and be prepared for 2025.
thank you. I therefore like to make a motion to accept the recommendations on page 81, please.
And I have a seconder for that. Thank you. Directors, any other questions before I call the vote on this? And this is voting all. I don't see any hands, so all those in favor? And that's carried. Thank you. Thank you, Director Lee, for letting us know that you needed that moved up. Next up is item number 8, Wood Creek Park Wastewater 2024 User Fee Review, which is Annex G, pages 57 to 59 of the original package. And directors, any questions on this one? I believe this is Area E, isn't it? Wood Creek Park?
No, I'm fine with Wood Creek Park. You know, there's work going on in Wood Creek Park right now, and I assume at the sometime next year that we'll know more about the situation with Wood Creek Park and take another look at it for 2025. Was there any exciting news about Wood Creek Park that I should know?
Not at this moment in time. Otherwise, I would have told you. No, but the capital project is advancing well, and so no big surprises there so far. Thank you.
Great, thank you. No surprises is good news when it comes to wastewater plants. So I would be happy to move the recommendations on page 57.
And I've got seconders for that. Thank you very much. And I don't see any other hands up, so I will call the question. Voting all directors. All those in favor? And that's carried. Next is the Wood Creek Park Wastewater Capital Plan update, which I think your capital question just got answered there. Director McMahon?
Right, same as above. I'd like to move the recommendations on page 60.
Okay, and I've got that seconded. Thank you, Director Bax. And no hands up, so I'll call the question. All those in favor? And that's carried. Thank you. Moving on to Annex I, pages 63 to 67, is Secret Cove Wastewater 2024 User Fee Review. And Director Gabias.
Thank you, Chair. My questions were answered earlier through another item, so I am okay with the recommendations. So I'm happy to move the recommendations listed on page 63.
Thank you. And do I have a seconder for that? I do. Thank you very much. No other hands up. I will call the question. All directors, all those in favor? And that's carried. Thank you. Langdale wastewater capital plan update. Director Stamford.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I do have a couple of comments about this. I noticed on page 68, under discussion, it seems that's just been cut and paste from the previous year, because as far as I know, there hasn't been any output or engagement with the local community for this summer. That happened the previous summer. So there's been no added community engagement this year. And so based on that, I'm not understand these capital increases are necessary, but I think the community that relies on the system, when it's not in good shape, have not really seen any work done. And they make comments about that there's no specific plan in place. There's no work being done. So there's some concern about why we keep paying into this. I think that may change in the next 10 days or so. But another question I have, and this may be to GM Rosenblum, is this capital plan, because we don't have any details, I'm not sure. Does it include work with the YMCA camp? And how does that impact our capital plan when we're dealing with a private water system? Or is that a conversation for another day?
Thank you. GM Rosenboom.
Sorry, I had to turn on my mic and the camera. So in terms of work with the YMCA, you're correct that we're still that is still on the docket, one of the projects that we need to pay a lot of attention to, including and that includes, of course, also the consultation with the community. So thanks for raising that again. The need to that you are receiving questions for that, because we would like to address those sooner than later with the community directly. With respect to the capital plan, what is included there and not, I'm going to refer that question to Kyle. Are you still online and are you able to answer that? What is considered here in terms of assets and not?
Manager Doyle.
Thank you to the chair. So this report highlights the fact that there is still uncertainty as far as what's going to go forward. As we stated last year, we didn't want to commit to a 5-year funding package because we weren't sure whether we'd be connecting to a neighboring plant and negotiating a deal with them, or we'd be replacing the system fully. That decision still hasn't been fully clarified. But we do recognize that the funding.
Manager Doyle, sorry, I got to cut you off there. I need you to pull that microphone a little bit closer.
Eat it.
Sorry about that. Is that better? Can you hear me?
That is better. Thank you.
Sorry, challenging myself here to speak loudly. The uncertainty about the direction which the solution for this wastewater treatment plant will take it remains. For that reason, we're recommending a 1-year increase. Does that answer the question? I'm sorry, I got lost here.
I think, given the circumstances, as well as could be, but I will be certainly looking at this a lot more actively over the coming year.
Okay.
If I may,
GM
Chair?
Rosenboom, yes.
If there, and this is related to relevant for all wastewater treatment plants. Every wastewater treatment plant has their own Let's Talk page. So if taxpayers have any questions about what's going on, what the status of a project is, I definitely encourage them to just put it in a question there, and we'll go back to that.
Thank you. Director McMahon.
Yeah, that's just a follow-up. So there is a page under Let's Talk for each of the sewer systems. And I was just investigating mine pages, and some of the links aren't working because they're being updated based on today's meeting, which is pretty cool. So stay tuned and check your wastewater plant pages on our website.
I guess we know what our communications team's up to today. Director Stamford.
I'd like to, if there's no other questions, I'd like to move the recommendations on page 67.
Thank you. And I have a seconder for that. I don't have any other questions. Director Stamford, I see your hand up again, or still, or is that a leftover? Okay. I'm going to call the question then. All directors, all those in favor? That's carried. Thank you. Next up, Annex K, pages 70 to 73, Curran Road, wastewater 2024 user fee review. I think this is Area B. Director Gabias?
Thank you, Chair. I'm looking at the disposal and trucking expenses, which are pretty high. And is there anything that staff can tell me about those kind of very high costs and what's causing them?
I mean, beyond the district of Seashelt. As was addressed earlier, I guess, yeah, has Curran Road seen an increase in pump out requirements, or is it just the continuing inflation of costs?
Thank you, Chair. Going back to, again, the costs of hauling has, oops, sorry, camera. The cost of hauling has increased. I'm guessing, I can't remember exactly, but it's 25 or 30% in this last year. It's gone up considerably, and that's a large portion of the cost of pumping out a plant. Curran Road is a challenging plant to operate as well. It has a lot of fines in it, like that float through the chambers, so we have to pump out. We're trying to address that problem, as we have in Roberts Creek, and we are doing at Lily Lake right now. So, but that's where it was touched on by GM Rosenboom earlier. These budgets are small relatively compared to water budgets that we have. And when you call out a truck and you take 2 loads out of the plant and it costs $5,000, it whacks the budget. So that's, as you can see on page 71 there, we're projecting a deficit this year. That might have just been 1 truckload. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions from directors? If not, I would look to the area director.
Sure, I would like to make a motion to accept the recommendations on page 70.
And I have a seconder for that. Thank you. I don't see any other hands up, so I will call the question. All those in favor? And that's carried. Next up, Roberts Creek Co-housing wastewater 2024 user fee review, which is Annex L, pages 74 to 77. Director Bax.
Oh, I'm just so happy to be here. I really like the progress that's been made on this particular system. One of the first field trips we made as a board last year was to tour the facility at the Roberts Creek Co-housing, and the work was just being completed at that time. And I look at this report and it looks like the work has taken hold, and it's no surprises, unlike the Langdale wastewater facility. And so I'm very and the stepped increase was discussed last year, and I like the recommendations on page 74, and so I'd like to ask that you vote for that.
So you're moving those recommendations?
That is correct.
Thank you very much. And I've got a seconder for that. I don't see any other hands up. I also appreciated that tour of the co-housing treatment plant. It's a nice looking facility, and it's nice that the users are positively engaged with the process and with keeping that plant running. So I will call the question. All directors, all those in favor? That's carried. All right, next up is the Roberts Creek Co-housing wastewater capital plan update. And I will turn this back over to Director Bax.
Without any other questions, I would move the recommendations as they appear on page 78.
Okay, and I have seconders for that. Thank you. And I don't see any other hands up, so all those in favor? And that's carried. Thank you. And the last item on our agenda is item number 16, Annex O, pages 84 to 85, 2024 refuse collection fee review. Did the CFO wish to speak to this?
Thank you, Chair. So our refuse collection is one of the rates where we saw a annual increase in alignment with some of the refuse collection contracts. It has worked relatively well, and so for 2024, we anticipate, or we already know, that some of the contracts within that particular service are coming up for renewal. We have also seen some positive variances in the service over this 3-year period, and so we are recommending that we keep the rates the same as 2023. And so we wanted to ensure that this was for information. The way that the bylaw is written is that the rates were in effect in 2023, and so there's actually no further action that we wanted to do. But we wanted to ensure from a communication standpoint that people understood, and that the board also understood that when those contracts come forward, we do anticipate some increases, and so there will be some recommendations coming forward for both contract approval, but also potentially some increases for 2024 that can be, or 2025 that can be anticipated.
Great, thank you. As the CFO indicated, this is just for information. Directors, do you have any questions about the report? I don't see any hands up. So with that, we have no communications, we have no new business, we have no in-camera session. I'll look for a motion to adjourn. Moved and seconded. All those in favor? That's carried. Thank you very much. And questions from the gallery? Gary, come on up to the microphone though, because we've got somebody online today.
Do you hear me? Oh, I guess. Toth, and our director, Justine Gebius, for the work they've done to try and promote the issues we have from Square Bay. And I'd like to read it out very quickly to you. The first major question is, why are our annual budgets for Square Bay so widely different from actual operation costs? That, and I'm going to break it down to explain why. Since the new plant implementation in 2019 to this year's budget, user charges have increased by over 400%. Budgets have greatly exceeded actual operations expenses in the period from 2020 through to third quarter 2023. Actual expenditures were 35% less than budgets. This may sound great, but just the same as we're proposing to keep the budget the same, might sound great, but when I'm finished here, you'll understand it isn't that great. Budgeted expenses, not actual expenditures, drive user charges. One way of looking at this is that during this 4-year period, budgets were higher than actual
Thank you, Gary. I know that you guys have met extensively with Director Gabius and I think SCRD staff. So I'm not aware of everything that's going on here. I can't speak to any of this myself. I don't know if staff or the director want to make any comments today. But CFO Perot?
Yeah, I think that there, in our meetings with the Square Bay user groups in the past, I think there would be an opportunity to explain public sector accounting. I think that a lot of carry forward projects are being considered as part of those surpluses. And so, as the board knows, those particular sources of funding are protected as part of that particular project, so they may move from year to year. So essentially, I think there's some clarification on how our operating budgets from a public sector accounting standard actually work for the regional district. So
Okay. I mean, it's good feedback that clearly we have more communication to do.
Yeah.
Gary?
It'd be great if, I'm trying to organize Tina's day, but if you could spend some time with us to sort that out, it'd be really appreciated.
Okay. Thank you. And, oh, come on up to the microphone.
Thank you, Chair. My name's Ward.
You're gonna have to turn your microphone on, just push the button, the green light, or there's a green light that'll come on.
Right. Oh, it's green now.
There you
Thank
go.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Directors. I'm Lyle Wharton. I'm a longtime resident of Truman Road in the Square Bay, and I'm here to continue the saga of our budget problems. Please excuse me if I'm confused, but we've only had a few days since the recommendation for our fees was presented on the website, and also that there is very little detail. So we're shadow boxing, and by the questions I've heard relative to some of the budgets here, we're not unique in that right now. I think there's an underlying fundamental question, just really briefly, is why is so little work being done on correcting this hideous problem with the collection system? We have every year since 2020 budgets that have been identified and approved by the board that have equaled over $50,000 per year during this time. Now, those budgets for those projects to correct this problem that is created by these collection system issues account for pretty close to half of our operating budget. But each year, very, very little is done. In fact, as I mentioned, 50% of our budget or close to it is related to these projects, but only 4% of our operating budget has been spent on those projects. Now, that's kind of a rhetorical question as to why the work isn't being done. We've been told at various times that, first of all, there have been inadequate reserves to cover those. And I think that's hasn't been clear to us as our reserves appear in each year-end reserve balance report to be totally adequate to cover those expenses. We've been told that they're awaiting the upgrade planning project to determine what they need to do to correct the system. However, that was proposed first in 2020. It was budgeted, this upgrade planning. It was budgeted in 2021. It was not done. It was budgeted in 2022. It was budgeted and then deferred. It was budgeted for 2023. And to date, we have heard that no action really has started relative to that upgrade plan. And so we're carrying forward these large budgets for these upgrades and for the correction of the system. And yet, as I mentioned, very, very little work has been done. Now, we're told that, well, these aren't really projects at all. They're really operating expenses to provide reserves to cover unexpected and unexplained on recurrent problems such as the plant upsets. But they, our reserves at the end of 2022 into this year were at 27,000, I think. It was stated in the budget for 2023 that the target reserve is 5,000, so we're well over that. We also have an additional in excess of 50,000 in our capital budget. And year-to-date through Q3, they've added another 19,000 to our reserves. So we're looking at over $50,000 in our reserves for operations. And we have an additional operating surplus of $10,000 year-to-date. So as Gary Moore indicated, we're roughly half the expenses this year relative to budget, and that doesn't make a lot of sense. These projects or operating expenses or reserve creation have been presented and passed by the board through the last 3 successive sessions, and I think it's time to drop anchor on this and make things real. If they need to create more reserves, let's identify them as such, not try to indicate that they are related somehow to correcting the collection system. Let's make sure that what we are proposing to spend on correcting this system, in other words, real projects, that they're well-defined, and that according to your board policy manual, that management ensures that they have the capacity and capability to do it. We've also been told that they haven't been done because we do not have the capacity to do it. So budgeting things that are unrealistic doesn't make sense to us. If we were to look at this year's budget, sustaining last year's at $1,281 in user fees, we suspect, although we don't have information, that that our old friends, these projects are rolling forward again. And I think if we were to look at that and say, let's yank those, let's determine if we need to have a reserve budget increase, although totally we have over 100,000 in reserves, then let's identify them as such and not hide them under budget proposals for projects. So I would ask the board to really, I guess, scrutinize or review these budgets in light of that. By our calculations, we would say that the 2021 project should be deferred out of next year's budget. And that would result in a user fee of $900, not $1,281 again. And if there's additional requirements for reserves, let's hear about it. And I'm sure identified as such, the community would be responsive to it. So let's get real. There's a lot to be proud of in terms of that new sewer plant. And our effluent is 1/3 the contamination that's allowed by the federal government, by the provincial government. And the technicians and staff work really hard to keep that plant operating top-notch. And they've also been called above the call of duty, basically, to keep that plant operating properly through plant upsets, meaning a lot of personal time as well as usually in the middle of the night. And so I think let's get the budgets reflecting what's really happening on the ground. So with that, I just thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you for your comments. I did want to highlight that while I don't know specifically what projects may or may not be getting done within this specific wastewater plant, and maybe I'll put Manager Waukee on the spot there, the Utility Services Division has been suffering from staffing shortages for multiple years now. And with the state of local emergency and the critical situation we were in with water last year and with how critical water was this year, it's all the same people that are trying to run both water and wastewater. And I have a guess that a lot of it has been prioritizing water over wastewater projects, which, you know, without the water, the wastewater's moot, right?
Yeah.
But maybe I'll just look over to Manager Walkie to see if he wanted to comment. Or GM Rosenboom.
I will start, and then I will hand it over to, I'll turn on my camera, otherwise. Yes, thank you, Chair Todd, and thank you, members of the public, for raising these questions. Yes, you're correct. We've faced last several years, we've had ongoing issues with recruitment. Finding the right people with the right skill sets to do the jobs that we need to do is challenging in general, especially on engineering and water and wastewater technical people with those kind of skill sets. And as you alluded to, the staff we had, frequently we would like to have them work on these kind of projects, because it's not that we don't find them important, but it's just if we have to prioritize, sometimes the water projects get the priority over these kind of wastewater projects that we, and the only reason why we bring them forward, because we feel that they're required, they need to be done. Otherwise, we wouldn't even bring them to the board for their consideration. So it's not that we would like them to be not completed, but we can't complete them because sometimes we're also stringed by how many staff we actually have available. And I think our CFO might have some remarks with respect to the financials, or shall I first move to manager?
Manager Walkie.
Thank you, Chair. I'll just follow on that note from Jim Rosenboom, and I don't like making excuses, but I'll just explain that I have 3 staff that report to me. In the operations engineering department, their total time at the regional district amasses to 15 months combined. It's taken 3 years to replace one of them, and she started this week. So as was noted, there's positives to everything. We now have our 3 staff members. One started in February, one started in May, and one started this week. So that's part of the problem. When it takes 2 to 3 years to replace a position like that. Also on our crew, we're missing 3 very important positions, one of which we've advertised for 6 months, and we have nobody in line yet. And because of that position vacancy, the coordinator who looks after the wastewater plants is doing double duty, covering that position as well. So that's the staffing end of this. Talking about the projects that are in the operations gambit are the feasibility study on the collection system, the right-of-way, we have some right-of-way issues, and the infiltration problems. And what we have done on the infiltration problems is try to do as much as we can without digging up hard surfaces. It sounds like a lot of money, $20,000, $30,000, but once you dig up the asphalt and there's rock there, it's gone. And there's a lot of issues in that collection system. Thus, the staff brought forward the idea of a feasibility study, which we received a grant for. That feasibility study would lead towards hopefully applying for grants, because I can't remember what my estimate was on that replacement of that collection system, but you're talking 1 million plus, if not 2 million kind of thing. It's $1,000 a meter to install water mains in this area like that, and that's what I would expect at least for this collection system. So I'm hoping now that we have 3 staff members, maybe this person who's been here 5 days today and getting some training today, maybe that will help us get this feasibility off the ground. But once that feasibility study is done, we don't have $1 to $2 million in reserves and capital in this wastewater plant, so it would rely on a grant. But as you know, grants aren't usually 100% funded, so 20% or so would have to come from the users, which if it's $1 million project, that's $200,000. Thank you.
Okay. So
May I comment, Chair?
sure, real quick.
Okay. I certainly have no criticism of the staff associated with as I mentioned, they often go well beyond the call of duty. But doesn't this highlight the fact that, one, projects are approved based on the assurances of staff that they have the capacity to undertake those projects? And yet every year those projects are in there, and it would appear that every year they cannot assure that they're going to be doing this. And this is according to your board manual, and it's according to good sense. Let's take a look at those budgets and make sure that we have the capacity before we put them in. And as I say, I think it's a fairly simple request, and I think that it's important and incumbent on the board to assure that the policy manual and the project requests are in line with that policy.
Thank you. I mean, at the end of the day, we can't possibly know that it's going to take 3 years to replace an employee that leaves. And we can't also know that somebody's not going to leave us tomorrow, right? I hear the frustration, I hear the concerns. You know, the good news is that money stays with the plant, it stays with that function. It's not like that money is going to go into fixing Langdale. I think 2024, if we can maintain the full 3 staff complement, hopefully we see some change for you this coming year. So, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, and with that, thank you, everybody.